"Stop the music right now," Bruno Mars shouted, his voice slicing through the roaring stadium as Rose suddenly covered her face and began to cry beneath the white-hot stage lights. For one impossible second nobody moved. 60,000 people stood frozen, their cheers collapsing into a stunned silence, while the last note of the band's song trembled through the speakers like an unanswered question. Bruno lowered his microphone and stared toward Rose, who was standing several feet away with tears streaming down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking as she tried desperately to breathe normally. The giant screens above the stage magnified every detail. The trembling fingers pressed against her lips, the mascara darkened corners of her eyes, the expression of someone desperately trying to hide a memory that had suddenly become too painful to contain. "Rose," Bruno said softly, walking toward her. "Look at me." She shook her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The microphone caught the words, sending them into every corner of the stadium. A collective gasp rolled through the crowd. Bruno stopped. His usual playful smile was gone. The spotlight followed him as he slowly lowered his microphone. "You don't have to apologize." Rose wiped her cheeks, but another tear immediately followed. Somewhere behind the stage, a technician whispered urgently into his headset. Bruno heard it. His eyes shifted toward the darkness beyond the curtains. Something was wrong, and judging from the expression suddenly appearing on the faces of the crew, this was much bigger than an emotional moment on stage. Bruno turned back toward the audience. "Everybody, give us a second." The band stopped completely. The bass disappeared. The drums fell silent. Even the enormous stadium seemed to hold its breath. Rose looked at Bruno with an expression filled with fear, gratitude, and something else he could not understand. "They said it was gone," she murmured. Bruno leaned closer. "What was supposed to be gone?" Rose stared at him for several seconds before answering. "The recording." Bruno's expression changed. "What recording?" She looked toward the backstage entrance. Her lips trembled. "The one I never wanted anyone to hear." The words landed harder than any scream could have. Bruno glanced toward his crew, then toward the giant screens, realizing that thousands of people had just heard a sentence that was never meant to leave the backstage corridor. Minutes earlier, the concert had been everything fans expected. Lights sweeping across the stadium, guitars flashing beneath blue beams, drums pounding through the floor, and Bruno moving across the stage with the effortless confidence that had made him one of the most magnetic performers in the world. Rose had joined him for a special performance, and the audience had erupted the moment she appeared. Their voices had blended beautifully, her softer tone weaving around Bruno's warm, powerful delivery. But during the final verse, Rose had suddenly looked toward the side of the stage. At first Bruno assumed she had missed a cue. Then he noticed the color draining from her face. She stopped singing for half a second, her eyes fixed on something hidden beyond the lights. Bruno had followed her gaze, but he saw only equipment, cables, and crew members moving in the shadows. Rose finished the song somehow. Then the tears came. Now, standing beneath thousands of white lights, Bruno could see that she was fighting an invisible battle. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Not here," she replied. "I can't." "Then we'll leave the stage." The audience erupted into murmurs as Bruno took her hand and guided her toward the side. But before they could reach the curtain, a strange sound came from the speakers. A faint crackle. Then a voice. Rose froze. Bruno stopped walking. The voice was distorted, barely recognizable, but Rose knew it immediately. Her eyes widened. "No," she whispered. The stadium screens suddenly flickered. For less than 2 seconds a black frame appeared. Then a photograph flashed across the giant screens. Rose standing alone in an empty rehearsal room. A timestamp appeared beneath the image. 5 years earlier. The audience screamed in confusion. Bruno looked toward the control booth. "Who is running that screen?" he demanded. Nobody answered. The image disappeared, replaced by darkness. Rose's knees nearly gave way. Bruno caught her before she fell. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're safe." But Rose shook her head. "No, Bruno. That's what scares me." He looked at her. "What?" She swallowed hard. "If they found that recording, then they found the person who made it." The stadium remained strangely quiet as security moved into position around the stage. Bruno's instincts told him not to continue the show. He had performed through technical failures, injuries, broken microphones, unexpected weather, and countless moments when everything seemed to collapse around him. But this was different. This was personal. He could see it in Rosé's eyes. She was not crying because of the audience. She was crying because something buried deep inside her past had just resurfaced. Backstage, Bruno brought her into a small dressing room where the air smelled of hairspray, warm electronics, and coffee that had been sitting untouched for hours. Rose sat on the edge of a couch staring at the floor. Her hands were shaking. Bruno closed the door. "Nobody comes in unless I say so." She nodded silently. "Now tell me." For several seconds she said nothing. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an old silver music player. Its surface was scratched, the edges worn from years of use. Bruno stared at it. "You kept that?" "I thought I destroyed it." "What was on it?" Rose looked at him. "A voice memo." "Yours?" She shook her head. "Someone else's." Bruno waited. 5 years ago, she began. "I was working on a song alone. I was exhausted. I had been doubting everything, my voice, my future, whether I deserved to be standing on stages at all. Someone came into the studio that night. Someone I trusted." Her voice cracked. "We talked for hours. They told me something I had never heard anyone say to me before." Bruno sat opposite her. "What did they say?" Rose looked down at the music player. "They said that if I ever disappeared, I should remember that my music had saved someone else." Bruno frowned. "That sounds like a goodbye." It was. The room became silent. The next morning that person was gone. Bruno's expression hardened. "Who?" Rose closed her eyes. "I promised never to say. Even now. Especially now." Bruno leaned back, realizing the situation was far deeper than a leaked recording. Why would someone play that tonight? Rose looked toward the door. "Because they want me to remember." "Remember what?" She whispered. "What happened after that night?" Outside the dressing room, the stadium crowd was still waiting. Security teams were moving through corridors. Technicians were checking the screens. Nobody could explain how the photograph had appeared. Then Bruno's phone vibrated. One message. No name. Only a video file. The message beneath it contained 6 words. "You should have let her forget." Bruno stared at the screen. Rose noticed his expression. "What is it?" He hesitated. Then he turned the phone toward her. Her face went completely pale. "Delete it," she whispered. "Why?" "Because if you watch it, you become part of this." Bruno looked at the door, then back at her. "I already am." He pressed play. The video opened with a dark studio room. The camera angle was fixed from a corner. A younger Rose sat at a piano, exhausted and crying quietly. Someone sat beside her, but their face remained outside the frame. Then the mysterious voice spoke. "Promise me you won't blame yourself." Rose covered her mouth. Bruno stared at the screen. The recording continued. "If they ever tell you what happened, don't believe them." A sudden noise came from the hallway. Bruno paused the video. Someone had stopped outside the dressing room. He slowly stood. Rose grabbed his wrist. "Don't open the door." 3 seconds passed. Then a folded piece of paper slid underneath it. Bruno stared at the paper. Rose was trembling. He picked it up. There were only 4 words written across the page. "You know who I am." Bruno looked at Rose. She began crying again. But this time she wasn't looking at the paper. She was looking at him. "I do," she whispered. "And that's why I'm terrified." The lights suddenly went out. For a few seconds complete darkness swallowed the room. Then the emergency lights flickered red. Bruno heard footsteps running down the corridor. He opened the door, but the hallway was empty. On the floor lay another object, a pair of old studio headphones. Rose recognized them instantly. She stepped backward. Those belonged to him. Bruno picked them up carefully. "Who?" Rose stared at the headphones as though they had returned from a grave. "The person who disappeared." Hours later, the concert venue had finally emptied. But nobody inside the production team could explain what had happened. Bruno refused to leave Rose alone. He stayed with her in a quiet rehearsal room while security reviewed camera footage. Every corridor had been checked. Nobody suspicious appeared on the recordings. The photograph had somehow been inserted into the live visual system remotely. The rain had stopped by midnight, but Rose still felt as though she were standing inside a storm. She sat alone in the back of the black van as city lights slid across the window in long golden streaks, each reflection briefly illuminating her tired face before disappearing into darkness. Bruno was in the vehicle behind her, surrounded by security and members of the production team, but he had insisted that they stay close. Nobody said it aloud, yet everyone understood that the strange events from the concert had changed everything. The mysterious recording, the photograph, the impossible appearance of the figure backstage, and the voice that had somehow known Bruno would be beside her were no longer things they could dismiss as technical failures or coincidence. Rose reached into her jacket pocket and touched the old studio headphones she had taken from the abandoned building. The plastic felt cold against her fingertips. She still couldn't explain why she had kept them. Maybe because throwing them away would mean admitting that the past was truly over. Maybe because some part of her still hoped the person connected to them was alive. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She stared at the screen without answering. It stopped. Then it vibrated again. A message appeared. You heard his voice. Now listen to yours. Rose's breathing stopped. Beneath the sentence was an audio file. She pressed play. At first there was only static. Then her own voice emerged from 5 years earlier. I don't want to do this anymore. Rose immediately removed the headphones. Her heart was pounding. She remembered that night. She remembered the studio. She remembered crying beside the piano. But she did not remember saying those words into a microphone. The recording continued from the phone speaker. If something happens to me, nobody can know. Rose froze. A second voice answered. Then let me carry the secret. She knew that voice. She had spent 5 years convincing herself she would never hear it again. The van suddenly slowed. Rose looked through the windshield. They were stopped at a red light. Her hands trembled as she replayed the recording. This time she heard something underneath the conversation. A faint ticking sound. 3 seconds. Pause. 3 seconds. Pause. 3 seconds. It was deliberate. She remembered her mother's old counting habit. 3 beats meant look behind you. Rose slowly turned toward the rear window. A silver sedan sat several cars behind them. Its headlights were off. She watched it for several seconds. When the traffic light turned green, the van moved forward. The silver sedan followed. Rose immediately called Bruno. He answered on the first ring. Are you okay? There's a car behind us. His tone changed instantly. What kind? Silver sedan. No headlights. Bruno spoke to the driver. Don't turn around. Keep moving. Rose watched the car through the window. It remained behind them for 3 blocks. Then it disappeared at an intersection. She exhaled. It's gone. Bruno remained silent for a moment. That doesn't mean it's over. I know. Stay with the security team when you arrive. Bruno. Yes. The recording was my voice. He didn't answer immediately. What did you say? I said I didn't want to do this anymore. Bruno's voice softened. You mean music? No, she looked down. Life. Silence filled the phone. Rose, Bruno said carefully. Are you telling me that 5 years ago you were in danger? She closed her eyes. I'm telling you that I don't remember everything that happened that night. When the van finally reached the hotel, Bruno was already waiting at the entrance. He didn't ask questions in front of the staff. He simply walked beside her into the private elevator. The doors closed. Play it, he said. Rose handed him the phone. He listened. His expression became increasingly serious. When the recording ended, he looked at her. You were alone? I thought I was. Who else was there? The person whose voice we heard. And you believe they're alive? Rose looked directly into his eyes. I don't know anymore. The elevator reached the upper floor. They stepped into a private lounge where the curtains were drawn and the lights were low. Bruno placed the phone on the table. We need to stop chasing pieces and find the whole story. Rose nodded. But there's something I haven't told you. What? She reached into her bag and removed a folded sheet of paper. I found this before the concert. Bruno unfolded it. It was an old studio schedule dated 5 years earlier. One appointment had been circled in red. 2:17 a.m. Underneath it was a single name. Bruno stared at it. This isn't the person you told me about. No. Then who is it? Rose swallowed. My producer. Bruno looked up. The one who managed the recordings? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because he disappeared 3 days after the person in the recording vanished. Bruno sat down slowly. The pieces were beginning to form a shape neither of them wanted to see. 2 people disappeared. 1 recording survived. Someone had spent years hiding the truth. And now, after 5 years, someone wanted Rose to remember. Bruno looked at the clock. 2:03 a.m. He stared at the red numbers. The appointment was at 2:17. Rose nodded. That's why I'm afraid. They waited in silence. At 2:10 the lights flickered. At 2:13 Bruno's phone lost signal. At 2:16 the hallway outside became completely silent. Then, at exactly 2:17 someone knocked 3 times. Rose stood frozen. Bruno moved toward the door. 3 more knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Rose whispered. That's the code. Bruno looked back at her. What does it mean? Tears appeared in her eyes. It means someone wants me to open the door. Bruno placed his hand on the handle but did not turn it. Then we don't open it. A voice came from the other side. Rose. She stopped breathing. It was the voice from the recording. I know you're there. Bruno looked at her. Do you recognize it? Rose nodded. Yes. The voice continued. I'm not here to hurt you. Rose whispered. Then why did you disappear? Silence. Then the answer came. Because I was trying to keep you alive. Bruno's eyes narrowed. Who are you? The voice did not answer. Instead, something slid beneath the door. A small black envelope. Rose stared at it. Bruno picked it up carefully and opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed Rose in the old studio 5 years earlier. Standing beside her was the person whose voice they had heard. But there was something else in the picture that neither of them had noticed before. Reflected in the studio window was a third person. Someone watching them from the darkness. Rose's face went pale. Bruno stared at the reflection. You know who that is, he said. Rose's lips trembled. Yes. Who? She looked at the door. The person I trusted most. The hallway fell silent again. When Bruno opened the door seconds later, nobody was there. Only an empty corridor, cold air, and a faint smell of cigarette smoke drifting toward the elevator. Rose stood behind him, staring into the darkness. For the first time, she understood that the person who had haunted her for 5 years might not have been the person she feared. The real danger had been standing beside them all along. By sunrise, Rose had stopped trying to convince herself that everything could still be explained away, because the photograph on the table had forced one terrifying possibility into the open. The person she had trusted most had been watching her that night, and if that person was connected to the recordings, then the past had never truly disappeared. Bruno stood beside the hotel window, watching the city slowly brighten beneath a pale gray sky, while Rose sat at the table with the photograph between them, repeatedly turning it over as if another answer might somehow appear on the back. There's nothing written, Bruno said. I know. Then why do you keep looking at it? Rose's fingers tightened around the edges. Because I remember the window. Bruno turned toward her. What about it? There was no third person that night. You're sure? I thought I was. She closed her eyes. But now I remember hearing footsteps. Bruno walked back to the table. How many? 3. 3. 3 footsteps, then silence. Her breathing became shallow. I thought it was someone leaving the building. Bruno studied the photograph again. What if they never left? Rose looked at him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Outside, the first traffic began moving through the streets, but inside the room everything felt suspended in time. Bruno picked up his phone and contacted his security director, asking for every available recording from the abandoned rehearsal building, the hotel, and the concert venue. While they waited, Rose walked toward the piano in the corner. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. 4 notes emerged softly. Bruno recognized the melody immediately. That's the same sequence from the recording. Rose nodded. But listen carefully. She played it again, this time slower. The final note was followed by a pause. Then she pressed a lower key. Bruno frowned. That wasn't in the recording. No, she looked at him. Because the recording was incomplete. Bruno stepped closer. What do you mean? Rose reached beneath the piano and pulled out a tiny metal box. I found this years ago. Bruno stared at it. You never opened it? I was afraid. Of what? Of finding out that my memory was wrong. She placed the box on the table. There was no lock. Inside was a small memory card and a handwritten note. Rose unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakably familiar. If you ever find this, don't trust the person who tells you they saved you. Bruno read the sentence twice. Rose's eyes filled with tears. That's his handwriting. Bruno looked at her. The person who disappeared. She nodded. Yes. They inserted the memory card into a secure computer. A single audio file appeared. No title. No date. Just a sequence of numbers. Bruno clicked play. Static filled the room. Then a voice spoke. If you're hearing this, something went wrong. Rose covered her mouth. I recorded this because I knew I might not get another chance. The voice continued. Rose, you were never supposed to know about the second recording. Bruno exchanged a glance with her. Second recording? The voice continued. The first one was designed to make you believe I was the danger. The second one contains the truth. Suddenly the audio became distorted. A second voice entered. A voice neither Bruno nor Rose recognized. You should have stopped. The first voice answered. It's too late. Then she pays for your mistake. Rose suddenly stood. Stop. Bruno paused the audio. Are you okay? I remember that sentence. From where? From the night I disappeared. Bruno stared at her. You disappeared too? Rose shook her head. Not physically. She pressed her hands against her temples. After that night I lost almost 2 days. I woke up in my apartment with no memory of how I got there. Bruno's face hardened. And you never told anyone? I thought I was losing my mind. She looked ashamed. Everyone around me kept telling me I was exhausted. They said I had imagined things. Eventually I believed them. Bruno sat beside her. You didn't imagine this. Rose looked at him. How can you know? Because somebody has been trying very hard to make sure you doubt yourself. The room fell quiet. Then the security director entered with a laptop. We found the vehicle. Bruno stood. The silver sedan? Yes. He placed a photograph on the table. It belongs to a private security company. Rose looked at the license plate. Her face changed instantly. I know that company. How? Bruno asked. They worked for my old management team. Bruno stared at her. Which means someone with access to your past has been following you. Rose nodded slowly. And they know about the recordings. The security director hesitated. There's more. He opened another file. The company dissolved 4 years ago. Bruno frowned. Then who owns the vehicle now? That's the problem. The registration was transferred to a person who died 3 years ago. Silence filled the room. Rose stared at the screen. That's impossible. Exactly, the security director said. Bruno looked toward the window. Someone is using a dead man's identity. Rose whispered. Just like the voice. That afternoon, they returned to the old studio building. This time they brought security. But Bruno insisted on entering the recording room himself. Dust covered the mixing console. The smell of old wood and damp concrete filled the air. Rose walked toward the window from the photograph. She stood exactly where she had been 5 years earlier. Here, she whispered. I remember now. Bruno stood behind her. What? Someone was standing outside. Who? I couldn't see their face. She touched the glass. But I remember the sound. What sound? She closed her eyes. A ring. Bruno frowned. A phone. No. A bracelet. She looked toward the floor. It had a small metal charm. Every time they moved, it made a tiny sound. Bruno searched the room. Can you remember anything else? Rose's expression changed. They said my name. Who? Not from outside. She turned around. From inside this room. Bruno froze. Then someone else was here. Rose nodded. Yes. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway. Security rushed toward the sound. Bruno immediately moved Rose behind him. They found an overturned equipment case, but nobody was there. On the floor was a small metallic charm shaped like a star. Rose stared at it. Her hands began shaking. That's it. Bruno picked it up. You're sure? I heard that sound every night for months after I left this place. She looked at the charm as though it were alive. It belonged to someone I trusted. Bruno's phone vibrated. A message appeared from the unknown number. You found the star. Now ask Rose what happened at 2:17. Bruno looked at her. You know what happened? Rose stared at the message. I remember the beginning. And the end. She slowly shook her head. No. Then we find it. They searched the building until they discovered a hidden room behind the recording booth. Inside were dozens of old tapes, photographs, and documents. One wall was covered with photographs of Rose taken over several years. Some were public appearances. Others showed private moments that nobody should have been able to capture. Bruno's anger rose. Someone was watching you for years. Rose stood motionless. I thought the paparazzi were responsible. This is different. He pointed toward a photograph taken inside her home. This was never public. Rose stepped backward. Her breathing became uneven. I want to leave. Bruno immediately nodded. We're leaving. But before they could turn around, a speaker in the hidden room clicked on. The familiar voice returned. Rose, I'm sorry you had to see that. She froze. Where are you? The voice answered. Closer than you think. Bruno looked around. Show yourself. Not yet. Rose stepped toward the speaker. Why are you doing this? Because you deserve to remember. Remember what? The night you thought I disappeared. Rose's eyes filled with tears. You didn't disappear. Silence. No, the voice said. I was taken. Bruno's expression hardened. By whom? The voice answered with a name. Rose went completely still. Bruno looked at her. Who is that? She could barely speak. My closest friend. The voice continued. She was there at 2:17. Rose shook her head. No, she saw everything. No. And she has been protecting the truth ever since. Rose began crying. Bruno stepped closer. Rose, look at me. She did. What did your friend know? Rose whispered. She knew who took him. The speaker went silent. Then a final message played automatically. Ask her why she lied. The room became completely quiet. Rose lowered her head. 5 years of confusion suddenly felt like a locked door beginning to open. She had spent years believing someone had abandoned her. Now she realized someone had stayed beside her every day while carrying the truth. Bruno placed a hand on her shoulder. Rose could not move when the woman stepped into the doorway, because every instinct inside her screamed that she knew that face, that voice, that careful expression hiding behind a calm smile, yet her mind refused to connect it with the memories that had been buried for 5 years. Mina, Rose whispered. The woman stopped beneath the weak fluorescent light, her dark coat still wet from the rain outside. A small silver star hanging from her bracelet and making the faint metallic sound Rose had remembered from that night. Bruno immediately stepped between them. Stay where you are. Mina raised both hands. I didn't come here to hurt her. Rose stared at the bracelet. You were there. Mina's expression cracked. Yes. At 2:17. Yes. You saw what happened. Mina looked at the floor. I saw enough. Rose's voice became sharper. Then why did you lie to me? Mina slowly lifted her eyes. Because I was told that if I spoke, you would be next. Bruno's jaw tightened. Who told you? Mina hesitated. The same person who controlled everything. Give us a name. Mina shook her head. You don't understand. Then make us understand. Bruno's voice echoed through the hidden room. Mina looked at Rose. He didn't disappear because he wanted to leave you. Rose's eyes filled with tears. I know that now. No, Mina whispered. You don't know what happened. She reached inside her coat and removed a small black recorder. This is the last thing he ever gave me. Rose stared at it. Why keep it? Because I was afraid. You were afraid for 5 years? Every day. Mina placed the recorder on the table. He told me never to give this to you unless someone forced the old recordings back into the world. Bruno looked at the device. And someone did. Mina nodded. They wanted you to find the truth. Rose frowned. Why would the person controlling everything want me to find the truth? Mina's expression became darker. Because they aren't controlling the story anymore. The sentence silenced everyone. Bruno pressed the recorder's button. Static filled the room. Then the missing man's voice appeared, older than Rose remembered but unmistakably familiar. If Mina is giving you this, then the plan failed. Rose covered her mouth. I need you to listen carefully. The person you trust most is not the person who betrayed you. The person who betrayed you is the one who made you believe you were abandoned. Bruno glanced at Mina. The recording continued. 5 years ago, I discovered that private conversations were being copied from our studio. First I thought it was a technical leak. Then I found cameras hidden inside the walls. Rose looked around the room. Cameras. I tried to remove them. That's when I discovered the recordings weren't being collected for money. They were being collected for leverage. Bruno's expression hardened. Leverage over whom? The voice answered. Everyone. Rose stepped closer to the recorder. What does that mean? The recording continued. Artists, managers, producers, executives. Anyone who knew too much could be threatened. I found evidence linking the system to someone much higher than I expected. The audio suddenly distorted. A second voice whispered something unintelligible. The recording stopped. Rose stared at the device. That's it. Mina shook her head. There's another file. Play it. Mina looked at Bruno. Once we hear it, there is no going back. Bruno answered immediately. Play it. Mina pressed the button. This time the recording began with footsteps. Someone was running. The missing man's breathing was heavy. They're following me. A door slammed. I don't know how much time I have. Rose closed her eyes. Please. His voice became softer. Rose, if you ever hear this, I need you to know something. I never abandoned you. A tear slipped down her cheek. I wanted to come back. The recording continued. But they gave me a choice. Either I disappeared, or they would destroy everything you had built. Rose whispered. No, I chose you. Her knees nearly gave way. Bruno caught her arm. The voice continued. But there was someone who helped me escape. Mina lowered her head. It was Mina. Rose looked at her. You helped him. Mina nodded, tears appearing in her eyes. I tried. You told me he left. Because I had to. You watched me suffer. I know. You watched me believe I wasn't worth staying for. Mina began crying. I know. Rose turned away. Her hands shook violently. How could you do that? Mina whispered. Because every time I wanted to tell you, I received another photograph of you. She opened her phone and showed them a folder filled with images. Rose leaving studios, entering apartments, sitting in cars, walking alone at night. Bruno's expression became furious. They were monitoring you. Yes, Mina said. And every photograph came with one sentence. Bruno looked at the screen. What sentence? Mina turned the phone around. Tell her he chose to leave. Rose closed her eyes. The words seemed to crush something inside her. 5 years of loneliness had been built around a lie. Bruno stood beside her without touching her, giving her space to breathe. After several seconds, Rose asked, Where is he now? Mina didn't answer. Mina. I don't know. You helped him escape. Yes. Then where did he go? Mina's voice broke. He disappeared again. Why? Because the people who were searching for him found me. Bruno stepped forward. When? 3 years ago. And they let you live? Mina nodded. Because I convinced them I had nothing. Bruno studied her carefully. But you kept the evidence. I couldn't destroy it. Why? Mina looked at Rose. Because one day I knew you would need to know that you weren't crazy. Rose wiped her tears. Then who sent the recording to me? Mina's expression changed. That's what I don't understand. A cold silence settled over the room. Bruno looked toward the old speakers. Someone wants us to continue. Mina nodded. And they're leading us somewhere. Rose looked at the wall of photographs. Then we follow. Bruno turned toward her. Are you sure? No, she took a deep breath. But I'm tired of being afraid of a story I don't remember. Mina slowly approached the wall and removed one photograph. Behind it was a narrow metal compartment. Inside was a key. Rose recognized the symbol engraved on it immediately. That's the old studio archive. Mina nodded. We need to go there. They left the hidden room together. But before they reached the exit, Bruno stopped. Wait. He pointed toward the floor. Fresh water droplets crossed the dusty corridor. Someone had entered the building recently. Mina looked at the trail. We're not alone. The three of them moved silently through the darkness. Outside, rain had begun falling again, tapping against broken windows like impatient fingers. They reached the archive room at the end of the corridor. The key fit perfectly. Inside were shelves filled with boxes, tapes, contracts, photographs, and old hard drives. Rose switched on a flashlight. What are we looking for? Mina answered. Anything with the star symbol. They searched for almost an hour. Finally, Bruno found a black box hidden behind several old recording reels. The star symbol was engraved on its lid. Rose opened it. Inside was a single envelope containing a photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed 4 people standing together 5 years earlier. Rose, Mina, the missing man, and one other person. Rose stared at the 4th figure. Her face slowly changed. Bruno looked at her. Who is that? She couldn't answer. Mina did. Your former manager. Rose stepped backward. No. He was the person who had access to everything. But he helped me. That's what made him dangerous. Bruno picked up the note. The handwriting belonged to the missing man. It contained only one sentence. If you want to know why I disappeared, ask him about the night Rose almost died. Rose's breath caught. Almost died. Mina closed her eyes. You don't remember because someone made sure you wouldn't. Suddenly, the archive lights turned on by themselves. Bruno spun around. A monitor at the far end of the room flickered to life. A video began playing. It showed Rose 5 years earlier, lying unconscious on the floor of the studio. Mina screamed, "Turn it off!" But Bruno couldn't move. On the screen, a figure entered the room and knelt beside Rose. The camera angle changed. The face became visible. Rose stared in horror. She knew the person. She had trusted him. She had thanked him. She had defended him publicly for years. And then the video showed him looking directly into the camera and saying, "If she remembers this night, everything is over." Rose's hand flew to her mouth. Bruno stepped closer to the screen. Who recorded this? Mina whispered. He did. The video suddenly stopped. A message appeared across the monitor. Now you know who started it. Rose stared at the words, tears running silently down her face. Bruno turned toward her. We have to leave. But Rose shook her head. No, Rose. The darkness swallowed the archive room so completely that for several seconds nobody could see their own hands. And then Rose heard the sound she had feared for 5 years. A slow metallic click, followed by the unmistakable voice of the man who had once promised to protect her. Then remember what happened after you woke up. Bruno immediately moved in front of Rose. Show yourself. A faint emergency light flickered on, revealing the old manager standing behind the glass partition at the end of the archive. He looked older now, thinner, exhausted, but his eyes were exactly as Rose remembered them. Calm. Controlled. Almost gentle. You, Rose whispered. He nodded. Yes. Bruno's voice became cold. You were behind the recordings. The man looked at him. Not all of them. You were watching her. I was protecting her. Rose laughed bitterly through her tears. Protecting me? You erased 2 days of my memory. The man's expression changed. I didn't erase anything. Then who did? He looked toward Mina. She knows. Mina shook her head. I only knew what you told me. The manager stepped closer to the glass. 5 years ago, Rose discovered that someone had been using private recordings to blackmail artists. She found the system because she accidentally accessed an encrypted archive. Rose stared at him. And you knew? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because the people behind it were more powerful than you understood. Bruno stepped forward. So you manipulated her memories? No, he looked directly at Rose. The night you collapsed, you were drugged by someone else. I found you unconscious and took you to a private doctor. The memory loss was a side effect. Rose's breathing became unsteady. Who drugged me? The man hesitated. The person who disappeared. Rose's eyes widened. No, he wasn't your enemy, the manager said. But he had become desperate. He believed the only way to make you safe was to make you forget what you had discovered. Mina looked stunned. You knew that. I discovered it later. Bruno looked toward Rose. Then why did he disappear? The manager's expression hardened. Because he realized the people behind the recordings had identified him. He made a deal. Rose whispered. What kind of deal? He agreed to disappear in exchange for your safety. Rose's tears returned. All these years. He believed you would eventually move on. And you let me hate him. I let you survive. The room fell silent. Rose stared at the man who had controlled so much of her life. You should have told me the truth. He lowered his head. You're right. Bruno stepped toward him. Who was behind the system? The manager looked at the monitor. That's the question that kept all of us afraid. He pulled a small drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. The recordings weren't created by one person. They were part of a network. Bruno frowned. A network. People collecting private information, manipulating contracts, threatening artists, controlling careers. The person you thought was responsible was only one piece. Rose stared at the drive. And the person who sent me all these recordings? Someone who wants the network exposed. Bruno asked. Who? The manager shook his head. I don't know. Suddenly, a phone rang somewhere inside the building. Everyone froze. 3 rings. Silence. 3 rings. Rose looked toward the darkness. That's the signal. Mina whispered. What signal? The one from the recordings. A voice came through an old speaker. Rose. Her eyes filled with tears. She knew the voice instantly. The missing man. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. Rose stepped toward the speaker. Where are you? Somewhere I can finally tell you the truth. Why didn't you come back? Because every time I tried, someone reminded me what would happen to you. I spent 5 years thinking you abandoned me. His voice broke. I know. You should have come back. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? Silence followed. Finally, he answered. Because loving you meant choosing your life over my presence. Rose closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Bruno watched quietly, understanding that this was no longer a mystery he could solve for her. It was a wound that needed to be acknowledged. Are you safe? Rose asked. For the first time. Where? I can't tell you yet. Will I ever see you? Maybe. The connection began fading. Rose panicked. Wait. His voice returned faintly. Rose. Yes. Keep singing. She smiled through tears. I will. The line went dead. The archive became silent. Rose stood motionless for several seconds before finally allowing herself to cry. Bruno approached her carefully. You okay? She shook her head. No, he nodded. That's okay. She wiped her face. But I'm free. Bruno smiled. That's more important. Months passed. The recordings were handed to investigators, and the hidden network began to unravel. Names surfaced. Contracts were examined. Old evidence was reopened. Some questions remained unanswered, and Rose never learned exactly where the missing man had gone. But the fear that had controlled her for years slowly lost its power. She returned to music. Not because she had forgotten what happened, but because she refused to let what happened define the rest of her life. One evening, Bruno invited her to perform again. The same stage. The same lights. The same enormous audience. Before the show began, Rose stood alone behind the curtain, listening to the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly. Bruno appeared beside her. Nervous. She smiled. Always. He laughed softly. Good. Good. Means you still care. Rose looked at the stage. Last time I stood there I couldn't breathe. And tonight. She took a deep breath. Tonight I can. The lights came up. Thousands of voices erupted. Bruno walked onto the stage first, then turned and extended his hand toward her. Rose took it. The crowd screamed. They performed the song that had once been hidden inside an old recording. The melody began quietly, almost like a confession. Rose's voice trembled during the first verse, But she continued. Bruno joined her on the chorus. Their voices rose together until the entire stadium seemed to vibrate. During the final line, Rose looked toward the darkness beyond the stage. For a moment she imagined she saw someone standing there. A familiar silhouette. A quiet smile. Then the figure disappeared. She did not chase it. She simply smiled. When the song ended, the stadium erupted. Bruno looked at her. You okay? Rose nodded. Yeah. Then she laughed through her tears. I'm really okay. Bruno raised his microphone. Sometimes we think the strongest people are the ones who never break. The audience became quiet. He looked at Rose. But sometimes strength is simply finding the courage to stand up after you've broken. Rose lowered her head, overwhelmed. The crowd began applauding. Slowly, she lifted her microphone. I used to think my tears meant I was weak. She looked into the sea of lights. Now I know they mean I survived something. The applause grew louder. Bruno stood beside her, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The moment belonged to her. Later, after the concert, Rose returned to the empty stage. She sat at the piano and played the 4 notes that had started everything. This time there was no hidden message. No mysterious voice. No secret photograph. Only music. She finished the melody and looked toward the empty seats. I'm still here, she whispered. From somewhere backstage, Bruno answered. And you're not alone. Rose smiled. She placed the old studio headphones beside the piano, not as a symbol of fear, but as a reminder of how far she had come. The mystery surrounding the missing man remained unresolved, and perhaps it always would. But Rose had finally understood something more important than knowing every answer. Sometimes healing doesn't come from discovering why someone left, but from discovering that you can keep moving even when they do. The lights slowly dimmed. The stadium became quiet. Rose stood, took one final look at the stage and walked away. For 5 years, she had believed the silence was waiting for her to remember. Now she understood the truth. The silence had been waiting for her to forgive herself. And when the final light disappeared, she smiled. Not because the past had vanished, but because it no longer had the power to decide her future.